Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast, where we discuss emerging technology, interview industry experts, and discuss how to build really great software. In this unique episode, Andrew and Fahad speak with Kristin Smith, Executive Director from the Blockchain Association in Washington, D.C. They dive into blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and how policymakers are addressing emerging technologies. Blockchain Association's mission is to change public policy in Washington so that crypto and blockchain technology have the clarity needed to thrive. Kristin is passionate about advancing blockchain with the support of Washington, D.C. She brings expert knowledge to this space, and we are so excited to have her on our show today.
I'm very, very thankful that you came and joined us today. Maybe we can start off and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and the Blockchain Association.
Yeah, so my name is Kristin Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Blockchain Association, and the Blockchain Association is a trade association located in Washington, D.C. that represents the interests of the open blockchain and cryptocurrency industry before Congress and regulators and other policymakers here in D.C. So we're here to change the policy. And by way of background, my career started as a staffer on Capitol Hill, where I worked my way up the ranks over 10 years and worked as a lobbyist. So I've always been in the world of public policy and find that interaction between public policy and disruptive technologies, which I believe crypto and open blockchain technology is disruptive in hopefully many good ways. And so this is a great place where I like to be, because this is, I think, a really exciting area of policy that hasn't been built yet. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and sounds like you're like in the heart of everything. Why is BA or Blockchain Association so important? You know, why is it so important to be in Washington as doing what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple reasons. One that's sort of a general reason that applies to everybody, but one really important reason for this industry specifically, and that is that this technology is really complicated. And I think when you're dealing with policymakers who don't come from a tech background, who don't understand how software is developed or how it works, it's really important to have a voice in the room and have somebody who can go in and boil the technology down to its essence and really get across kind of the key potential. But I think in general, and this applies to just about any industry group or other type of issue area out there, it's kind of this, like the lottery. You can't win if you don't play, I think is
right.
Some ad in some state somewhere. But you know, if we want to get better public policies that support the development of this technology, that's not going to happen in a vacuum. You have to show up. You have to have, you know, again, that key education piece that we spoke about just now, but also presenting ideas and asking for help. And so having a trade association for what is still a relatively, you know, nascent industry here on the ground, I think is really important. And it was important for the companies that came together to start the trade association when it launched a little less than a year and a half ago.
So obviously, coming from a non-technology background, there's a bit of a learning curve to learning, you know, technology in general. But you know, blockchain's intricate, it's complex. You know, it's a deep subject. So you know, how did you go about learning it? How many hours? You know, were you spending? How many hours a week do you spend now keeping up to date? Because it's a very fast-moving industry.
Yeah, no, it took me a long time to wrap my head around this. I spent probably about 6 months. This is well before I had this job. This was my prior job where I had a client who was doing some work in this space, and I became interested through that consulting work. But I spent about 6 months reading everything I could get my hands on, sometimes reading it 2 or 3 times, because I at first pass it when it makes sense. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of the internet videos online, and I would highlight and circle every word in some document that I didn't understand and Google search it, which led to more words I didn't understand, which led to more Google searching. It wasn't a very organized way of learning, but I mean, the beauty of the internet is you really can customize exactly what it is you're looking for. There's answers out there, it seems. But once I sort of got the basic understanding of how it worked and why this mattered, I still find every day that I'm learning about new developments in the industry and with the technology. And I, try to keep up with everything via, Twitter and the Block and CoinDesk and all the crypto news sources out there. But I find that the best way I really get my head around it is when we have one of our trade association member companies in town and we spend time together talking to policymakers, or I'm out in New York or San Francisco visiting companies and seeing what they're doing. I still, for me, it's kind of that human interaction, talking and being able to ask questions and going back and forth. But yeah, I think this is a space where the learning never stops, which is one of the reasons it's so fun.
Awesome. So kind of changing topics a little bit to more industry. Obviously, we're going to ask both these questions, but how does the public sector view blockchain? I mean, there's you can read about it. Obviously, people have opinions, but what would you say? There's the media portraying one thing, but then there's the actual zeitgeist, if you will. Where is it? Like, how do people view the technology as a whole?
So I think when it comes to blockchain specifically, for the past couple of years, there was sort of this, it's blockchain, not Bitcoin narrative. And blockchain itself has a pretty good reputation. It's when you get into these open blockchain networks that are fueled by cryptocurrencies that the question marks start to come up. And up until Facebook announced Libra, I guess, what was that, 6 months ago now, back in June, there wasn't there weren't many policymakers that were taking that industry or the technology seriously. And by the I'm talking about the crypto piece of it. But when Libra announced, they realized that, oh my goodness, these very big companies that we don't trust, or some big companies that we do trust, are getting into this space. And all of a sudden this is real and this is something that we have to pay attention to. So I think most people are curious. Some are a little confused and want to learn more. Some have a lot of concerns and are trying to figure out how to address those concerns using sort of legacy policy ideas, and others are trying to approach it with, okay, if this is really a new technology, maybe we need to look at things through a fresh lens. So there's a little bit of differentiation depending on if you're talking with members on Capitol Hill or with regulators who have the luxury of spending more time in the weeds. But I think there's been a shift in this past year where people realize the technology does have potential. They're not totally sure how it's going to play out, but they're ready to have the dialogue to figure out what we need to do to make sure consumers are protected, but the U.S. stays competitive.
Amazing. So in the private sector, obviously it's well received. People are investing hundreds of millions of dollars across, and billions in some cases, on this new technology. But what are their biggest concerns? Obviously, if you're building the new ACH system, I know Chase, JP Morgan Chase is investing a lot into that, a few other big banks as well. But what are their major concerns, right? When you start investing in this new stuff, AI, blockchain, the emerging technology, that doesn't have a lot of regulations around it, people, are always hesitant about different aspects. What hesitation do you see from the private sector?
Well, we just did a study that did a survey of different blockchain companies, and 91% of them said that regulatory concerns, specifically relating to the uncertainty of regulation, are top of mind. I think that in the private sector, whether it be enterprise blockchain applications or crypto blockchain applications, I think that there's faith in the technology, and that people believe that the technology, can do great things and will do great things, and there's a roadmap there. But they're running into this roadblock of not knowing when different regulations apply, or how they're going to apply, and that's scary. That can open different entities up to a lot of liability. It can maybe lead to stopping a project from going forward. And so I think that more so than most industries, the regulatory issues are really top of mind.
Interesting. So one thing that doesn't come up a lot on the campaign trail, because there's other hot button issues like healthcare and education and minimum wage and all of that, which we won't delve into on our podcast, but this is something that doesn't come up very often, which is emerging technology from candidates. One, because most people don't understand the emerging technologies. So for example, the threat from AI, and maybe someone invents a malicious AI that kills us all, aka Terminator, that doesn't really come up. But how do you work with people to kind of come up with these policies at all and be able to communicate to them, to their constituents? Like, this is my stance on this, say, blockchain in this case. This is how I feel about it. This is what I'm going to do if I become president or a congressperson or a senator. Does that ever come up, or are people just so focused on campaigning and getting, people involved with their other ideologies?
Yeah, on the presidential level, there have been a handful of candidates who have, at least on their websites or through other actions, said something positive actually about blockchain and crypto. And Andrew Yang, of course, is kind of a very tech-oriented candidate. He accepts crypto contributions, and he, on his website, talks about the importance of creating policies to foster the technology. Also Tulsi Gabbard, and then Eric Swalwell, who's no longer in the race, but who was at one point. Both of them have co-sponsored legislation in their role as, representatives in the House, a bill called the Token Taxonomy Act, which would help the industry get some clarity. So we've had a couple. We have done outreach to the campaigns to let them know that we're available, and as the to help and to educate and to give ideas. And as the pool of candidates narrows, their platforms will become more specific. And there's we think some really good messaging around the promise of the industry. I mean, one, we want the U.S. to be competitive because we believe that this technology is going to drive the next big wave of innovation, and everybody who's running for office in the United States, whether it be running for president or House or local mayor, like, everybody wants the U.S. to be a competitive economic force in the world. And so there's good messaging around that. There's also good messaging, especially for the Democratic candidates, about reducing the reliance on middlemen and making things more efficient, and opening up not only financial services, but opening up web platforms to more competition. And so there are some good narratives there. And so we're working and doing outreach to make sure that the campaigns have all the information that they need to make an informed decision. But yeah, I don't think this is a question we're going to get on the debate stage anytime soon.
I don't think so either. So
if it is, I'm having a shot of tequila and hosting a party.
I hope I'm invited. So with any emerging technology, one of the biggest concerns that comes out from regulators is jobs, right? So AI is threatening to disrupt the entire economy, and everyone's going to lose their job. And there's truth. There's always truth in the middle, right? And so what's that like? When you're telling people, hey, you're going to cut out the middlemen. I don't think most people understand how many middlemen are in the process to validate and audit and things that the blockchain just kind of automates away for people. Or at the very least, you can have a computer audit and give you the results. How do those conversations go when you talk about that? And in general, extrapolating that to like the rest of emerging technology, how do we in the private sector kind of broach that subject in a we care, but we have to move the economy forward anyways. We have to invest in AI to be competitive. What does that look like?
No, I mean, this is a concern that I think is as old as time, right? That, when cars come along, what are you going to do with the people that make the whips and the buggies and all the things that you need to get around in a horse-drawn carriage? But I think that what people, who kind of have that, I believe, short-sighted opinion, fail to understand is it actually opens up a whole lot of new opportunities. So if we look back, well, and I should say, especially in areas where there's a lot of concentration and almost near monopoly power. So if you look back over the past, 50, 60 years, there was a time when if you needed to have computing done, the only place to go to have a computer was to go to an IBM facility and use one of their mainframe computers. And that employed a lot of people. And what came along that sort of disrupted that monopoly wasn't necessarily like a policy intervention, but it was the invention of the microprocessor. And so by having this new technology come along, all of a sudden there was all of this innovation in the hardware space that hadn't been there before. Similarly with Microsoft, they were sort of the only game in town in the 70s and 80s if you wanted software developed. And then, having an open technology like Linux or even just the web come along really led to all sorts of innovation. And now we have these situations where we have all these sort of data monopolies out there. And yeah, there's new technology like crypto, but I think this would even apply to AI too, where by having this new technology layer, it opens up the possibility of all sorts of innovation. And so maybe the people down chain are not going to be in the needed for their role anymore, but we're hopeful that it opens up a whole economy that gives other opportunities that make us more productive, that provide new services that people need, and that creates more opportunity, not less. And I think AI might be particularly scary for people because it's a little bit closer to take AI and see how that could replace sort of a human being. But I think having applications of AI built over data will hopefully lead to new innovation, and that the economy will continue to grow, and things will get better for those of us on this earth, and then not worse. Just like most technology tends to do.
Cool. I'm going to pour one out for all the horses that lost their job to the car.
I wanted to come back to policy a little bit. So often in tech, there's this mantra we have. I think Zuckerberg made it famous, like, move fast and break things. And we often don't think about, we don't often think about policy much. It's like ask for forgiveness later. So what would you recommend for like companies and how they should navigate policy in Washington, but then also trying to advance, like blockchain, for example?
So the mantra of move fast and break things does not sit well with most policymakers in Washington, especially Congress. I think this was something, policymakers tend to want to think and debate some more, and then maybe act later if it's necessary. So it is very much a different philosophy, and I think there is some natural tension there between the technology industry and Washington on that front. And I think that if a company goes up to Capitol Hill in particular, right, because the Congress is the most direct branch of government to voters and constituents and the people. If you go up there and say we want to move fast and break things, that is not going to be well received by that audience. Even those that are fairly sort of pro-industry, they're going to want to see some responsibility there, some regard for existing regulation that might be in place, and it's important to acknowledge the concerns that policymakers have, because they're there for a reason. They're a reflection of sort of the will of the American people. Like we have securities laws today because there was concerns about having enough information to make an informed investment decision. There's a reason we have these laws. We're trying to protect the investor, and so you have to figure out how does the technology, the securities laws are a particular point of stress for the industry, because it's for the crypto industry in particular, because it's very hard to know when they apply and when they don't. And so you can't just go in and have total disregard for the government or total disregard for laws. You have to acknowledge that there's problems that they want to solve and figure out how to meet those goals in a way that makes sense for the technology. It's very hard to just dismiss them outright.
Yeah, well, I'll just mention one thing on that is it's just, it's a conflict of, I guess, speed, right? Tech companies want to move as fast as possible. Like Libra, I think they're going to push it through no matter, as much criticism as they get, they're still going to move it forward. And policymakers might be on the different time schedule. So I think there's this dance that they have to figure out. And it's a difficult one to figure out.
Yeah, and Libra was not, so at the Blockchain Association, Libra is not one of our members, so we do have a couple member companies that are part of the Libra Association. So we don't really represent their interest nor advocate for them. But yeah, this has not been well received at all. There are multiple bills that have been introduced that are aimed to stop the project. You have lawmakers threatening letters to companies who, are interested in participating. This is a great case study that I'm sure public policy students will be looking at for years to come on how not to roll out a big idea to Congress. And though I do agree, if they have the stomach and the will, they have, nearly unlimited resources. I do think there is a need around the world to have, an easier way for people to transact. And that if they want to see it through, I think that they can see it through. My question is going to be, do they want to deal with that when they have so many other policy issues? But right now they've got the bandwidth to do it. So it appears to be full steam ahead.
So one thing that we just have I'll give two examples, but there's a lot of examples in today's world. I'll give three examples, because they're all three egregious. Airbnb, Uber, and the scooters, right? They just kind of went into people's cities, did whatever the hell they wanted, and then got rewarded for it, ? Like they didn't, besides like 2 or 3 cities, and they hit national, international media in some cases of being banned. In the case of Uber, Airbnb hasn't really suffered that much at all. There's really if I'm a business owner, I look at that and say, well, if they can do it and disrupt an entire industry and not get punished for it, why can't I? What would you say to that? Obviously policy is important. We have to protect citizens. We have to protect our national interest. There's a lot of things we have to think about, but it seems like, those companies have broken the law and gotten away with it.
Yeah, that is definitely a strategy that works in certain scenarios. And I think the reason it works for Uber and Airbnb and even the scooters is that people are looking for cheaper, faster rides they can dial from their phone, or they're looking for a unique place to stay when they're on vacation. And and I'm not a scooter person, but some people love the scooters, and there's consumer demand. And so when something is able to get out there quickly, it's really hard to sort of push it back into the bottle, right? Especially when there are so many people who use them every day and like them, and those people vote for policymakers who ultimately need to be responsive to the people who elect them. And so I think that's why it works. Why with tech it gets a little bit more complicated, because I think particularly with blockchain and cryptocurrencies is that the timeline is longer. There are some really awesome, amazing, innovative crypto projects that are being built out right now that will completely change the way the internet works and provide more competition and provide better, lower cost services to consumers. The problem is it takes a few years to build those. You can't just launch them and instantly have a bunch of users that are using it and liking it and making it apparent that hey, having this thing launched that maybe skirted some securities laws is a good thing, because it doesn't exist yet. There's nothing that your everyday average American does with crypto on a daily basis other than buy it and hold on to it. And so the challenge is going to be if we can get a couple of these projects that have long been under development to get launched and get out there and be used. And I think that will, make it easier to get policy change. But, policymakers right now are like, okay, this still looks like gambling. It still looks super risky. And we still think we need protections in place. And that's sort of the perspective they're coming from. And so it'd be helpful if we could get, some maintenance launched and some projects, some people using the technology, because right now it's just not happening. And that's why that strategy doesn't work for crypto.
So I'm actually pro crypto, but I want to make an argument real fast for why anti-crypto. And then you can respond to my argument. So if I'm the United States, I'm pretty much the Federal Reserve currency of 98% of the world economy. Life's really good because everyone accepts the US dollar. It's the strongest, money in the world. So it's a super great currency. And I'm seeing that, the citizens want this decentralized thing, but the minute it becomes decentralized, I lose a lot of my trade power, being the reserve currency and all of that. What would you say to that if a regulator said this actually hurts our national interests because we get weaker currency?
It happens all the time. Yeah. So listen, there are different cryptocurrencies have different functions, and we talk a lot about there are a handful of dollar-backed stablecoins that you can buy and use today, whether it be USDC, which is a project of Coinbase Circle, True USD, which is a project of Trust Token, but there's also Paxos Standard and Gemini Dollar. That these are crypto tokens. Like in the case of USDC, it's built on top of Ethereum, where there is a reserve that holds $1 for every digital dollar issued, and those reserves are audited. And so a technology like that can actually bring a lot of the benefits of crypto, whether it be being able to program the currency to move under certain circumstances, or having access to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or being able to instantly transfer it. Those are all things that you can't do with dollars today that you can do with a dollar-backed stablecoin. And so we'd like to point out that the technology marketplace has already created the solution to keep the US dollar strong. And as more merchants and maybe even governments start to, approve the use of these, private sector packaging around the dollar that allows it to do amazing, cool things, we think that will preserve the dollar. We're not here. There might be some people in crypto, but at the Blockchain Association, we're not here to undermine the US dollar. But we also, there are currencies out there that, could potentially be a threat to the dollar. I think we're a ways off from having something like that. And if we get a really good digital dollar in place, then we won't have these same concerns. I also don't think, though, on the other hand, that the Fed should be doing this. The Fed is not a technology company. They would have to hire a lot of expensive contractors to get something like this done, and they don't need to do it because the private sector is already innovated on this front. So I think you can have a world where we have the benefits of crypto and the dollar, but there's also so many other things that these crypto networks can do. You can, Filecoin is trying to build out a decentralized file storage system, and the crypto that you use in that system, is very important because it interacts with the software to verify that the different terms of the storage agreement are being met, and it can refund the money if for some reason the criteria that were laid out in the agreement weren't met. So when you have a system like that that's out there, you want to have a dedicated cryptocurrency for that system. So as we see these software networks that are run by crypto start to emerge, that's not designed to be a threat to the US dollar. Libra, on the other hand, might be designed to be a threat to the US dollar. And I think that's one of the reasons that Congress is sort of up in arms on it, because that does undermine it when you have a basket of currencies. And so, this is going to be it's a very interesting time for world currencies right now, because central banks all around the world are trying to figure out how do we modernize and give people the flexibility and the services they need without undermining our own authority. And I think the U.S. is no different. But the good news is I think there's off-the-shelf solutions there today, and that this is in the next year or two going to play out to be a much more widely used and adopted part of the crypto world.
I think to answer your question, Andrew, I think stable coins will probably be that bridge to bring blockchain together. Because I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, it's when you come to currency, that's the sticky point with policymakers, right? Is there anything else, or is it just that when you talk about financial markets and currency?
I mean, here's the thing: the Federal Reserve serves a purpose. I actually don't like the Federal Reserve. I'm pretty Jacksonian on that topic, but I also think that, for example, when we have a recession, they have levers they can pull. They can reduce interest rate, they can print more money, they can cause inflation, they can cause deflation as well. And so these centralized levers allow us to control our economy and keep it healthy relatively. Obviously, there's going to be ebbs and flows to it, but for the most part, those levers are super important. If a private company runs that, they then have the levers to control. Now, stable coins being backed by a dollar is really good, but then there's the private-public partnership that's required, and sometimes a private owned stable coin may not agree with the federal policy of, like, for example, printing money or reducing interest rates. And so it's a huge topic to talk about, because it's, the Fed is a well understood science among hedge managers and hedge fund managers and all of that. And so stablecoin really stand a point to kind of disrupt that. I'm long on crypto, but figuring these things out, that's why policymakers are so important, and trade associations are so important, because it's like looking at both how the private industry is impacted by not being able to do, for example, create a stable coin because of this policy, or when they do, how the public sector is impacted by the distribution of those stable coins. And so it's a really, really deep and interesting topic that we could have a secondary podcast on all by itself that I'd love to talk about, because it's a really interesting topic.
No, I think stablecoins are fascinating. And if you had asked me a year ago what would be the primary concern of, particularly Congress when thinking about crypto, the thought of stablecoins being at the top of the discussion, I mean, I never would have predicted that in a million years. But Libra has really forced that conversation, and I've been very impressed by the level of knowledge that at least some of the staff and the councils on the Hill have, and they know the difference between a basket-backed stablecoin and a dollar-backed stablecoin and an algorithmic-backed stablecoin, and like they're a collateralized stablecoin. Like they're very very much in the weeds, and that was and again, I think all of this derives from this point that most people in the U.S. Congress are very concerned about the strength of the U.S. dollar, and that they don't want to lose its status as a reserve currency. And I think that for technology to come along that really threatens the dollar, we're quite a few years off from something like that, because Congress, is going to, they're going to step in and make sure something like that doesn't happen.
So one interesting thing that you're seeing now is the SEC and even the publicly traded markets, NASDAQ, Dow, NYSE, they're accepting some of these coins as being, you could buy futures and puts on crypto now, at least Bitcoin, I believe, maybe other cryptos as well. That's really interesting. Obviously, that had to go through a long approval process, I'm sure. I don't know that much about that, but are we going to see an explosion of that? Is this a core part of people's portfolio? And if it is, are we going to see legislation and policy around, for example, I'm an accredited investor, Fahad probably is as well, so I can buy private equities and startups and all of that. But they have rules around that to prevent people from going all in on a startup and losing their entire retirement. Are we going to start seeing things like that to protect consumers, or are we just so far away from that we don't have to worry about that in the next 2 or 3 years?
No, I think we're going to be seeing some measures to protect consumers. So on the derivative side, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, has jurisdiction over crypto futures, and they've approved some Bitcoin products and are getting closer to approving Ethereum derivatives. And I think it's important, right? Because derivatives are an important tool in price discovery and liquidity. And I think it's healthy for the underlying crypto token to have futures. And I think the big kind of the hole that's sort of there right now is there is regulation over the crypto futures markets, but there is not a whole lot of federal regulation over the crypto spot markets. And when I talk about crypto in this context, I'm talking about cryptocurrencies that regulators and other professionals in this space believe to be commodities as opposed to securities. There's a whole use of using blockchain technology to upgrade the way in which securities are issued and traded. That's sort of a separate conversation. But if you're looking at these crypto commodity tokens, those spot markets are fairly unregulated today. And I think in the U.S. there are some good practices in place, largely because of state regulation, like the New York BIT license, but also some of the money transmitter licenses. And but it's sort of a patchwork, and not everybody has all of them. And overseas, you have a lot of unregulated exchanges where there is a lot of wash trading that's going on to pump up volumes. And there's concern by some about the integrity of the underlying markets. I think some of it is maybe paranoia, but some of it is arguably well-founded. And so I think the discussion that we're going to start to see going into the next year is, do we need to have a regulator of crypto spot markets? And if so, at the federal level, and if so, what does that look like? Where is the right place to put that? Securities exchanges today are regulated by the SEC. But commodity exchanges, spot markets are relatively unregulated. And so crypto looks and feels like something a little bit different than like a wheat market or a grain market or something like that. So we're gonna see more and more discussions about that happening, and maybe even see some legislation to address that.
We're close to the end here, and I just had a few more questions. What are your thoughts on protecting the blockchain, industry and crypto from like bad actors and like criminal activities? Where do policymakers kind of fall on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a top concern for policymakers, because criminals tend to be pretty savvy and tend to be the first group of people to find a new technology and find a way to exploit it. But the U.S. government has been thinking about this for a long time, and it was all the way back in 2013, so going on 6+ years ago now, that FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, came out and made it very clear that certain on-ramps and off-ramps to crypto, we're going from US dollars to crypto, we're subject to anti-money laundering rules, OFAC rules, and that just because it was a cryptocurrency, you weren't going to be able to get around this. There's been subsequent guidance that's come out since then, and there's actually a fairly established framework in place. There have been discussions with Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body that has come up with recommendations. They're not fully implemented yet, and some of them actually do pose some technical challenges. It was sort of a square, in the instance of this so-called travel rule, it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole situation. And so the industry is working to figure out how to comply with some of these rules. But these are top of mind. For lawmakers on the Hill, when they don't understand the technology, the easiest thing to do is to talk about the bad actors, because that's a winning message to constituents who might also not know about the technology. So even though we do have a lot of rules in place that are aimed at going after the bad guys, it's still a topic that comes up frequently when dealing with lawmakers. And so I think that's a theme that will continue to be there, but I think there are solutions within the technology itself that can help fight that. The reality is there are bad guys in the world. There have been bad guys forever. there will always be bad guys. And
there's bad companies too.
Yeah.
there are bad companies too, and you want to make sure that they're not, committing fraud and other bad actors. And so it's important to have policies in place to do that, or at least that tends to be the collective position of policymakers in Washington. So yeah, that's always top of mind. But the key is to make sure that we can have the right types of protections we need that are in a way that doesn't stifle the innovation that we want to have in this space.
Yeah, so as we wrap up 2019, what are your thoughts and predictions for 2020? Are you excited? Continue to be excited? Any concerns?
I'm excited. I think we're sort of at the intersection of the industry and policymakers. And when you talk to the policymakers, they're frustrated because they don't quite see that the industry is doing something useful yet. They understand the potential, but they don't quite see something useful, as we spoke about before. When you talk to the industry, they're like, why hasn't Congress given us the clarity we need yet? And the reality is we need time. And I'm hoping 2020 is the year where we start to see really thoughtful, comprehensive policy proposals introduced and debated and considered. Probably won't get passed into law yet, but I think we're going to do some really important groundwork there. And then on the industry side, I think that we will hopefully start to see some of these projects launch where lawmakers have this aha moment that will help fuel their needs. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing, which makes it an interesting place to be. But I think this will be the year that we're going to see some real use cases come to bear, and also see some real tangible movement on the policy front. Again, maybe not completely like getting a bill signed into law type of movement, but I think we're going to see some thoughtful consideration. So I'm optimistic that this is going to be a pivotal year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What technology are you most excited about? That's either being developed, already out there and being developed in the open, or any of that?
Boy, that's I think what is exciting to me are projects like Blockstack out of New York, which has an application platform that is based on the idea that users can control their own information, and as they interact with different applications within their universe, that it protects consumer privacy. I think that's something that policymakers are particularly concerned about in light of the 2016 election and Facebook and concerns over data breaches. And I actually think that this technology can solve a lot of existing public policy concerns for lawmakers. And I think projects like Blockstack and others that are doing this are very exciting to me, because it's sort of a twofer. It's something cool in crypto, but it's something cool for the policymakers.
Awesome. And one last question from me. When's Ethereum 2.0 going to launch?
I don't know the answer.
I'm going to ask everybody until it launches. They're
Someday.
saying, oh, what's up, Fahad?
No, I said, yeah, I know the exact date, but I won't tell you.
Oh, okay, thanks.
No, there are a host of public policy issues that are sort of associated with that launch, because the IRS did some guidance on sort of these new I guess forks that come along, and there's actually some major tax implications that I think people could potentially have, but that's a topic for another show another time.
Yeah. Kristin, thank you so much for coming on. It's amazing how knowledgeable you are on this topic.
I'm learning new stuff every day, but it's a lot of fun. This is the coolest job I've ever had and the best group of people I've ever worked with.
That is great to hear. I feel like we could have done the 6-hour podcast if we had the time.
I think Kristin's going to be back real soon.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.